day, glimmering in the morning light. All my troubles seem so far away. Everything just feels so right, so right. Oh, what a day. Oh, what a day. A whole lot of sunshine is coming my way. What a day.
These claims precisely fit this absolutely no evidence description, incredibly. They're all easily rebutted and debunked. Let's start with the claim that Trump won the 2020 election. This can quickly and decisively be demonstrated as false for a variety of readily understood and undisputable reasons. Sadly, most Americans are not familiar with these easy to understand reasons why it's wrong, but let's briefly examine it and you'll show how preposterous it is. Okay, here's why the claim that the votes in the 2020 election
I just want to draw a line under this. What we're going to do and what you're going to do is lay out why the 2020 election, through logic and reason and evidence, is it why it's preposterous that it wasn't a valid election. I mean, you're going to underline that there's no way, just through logical thinking, that anyone who would think through this would think that the election was stolen. Correct?
That's exactly what I'm going to do, exactly, Randy. And I'm not going to ask you to take my word for anything. I'm going to cite facts that are undisputed
I know.
and are undisputable.
And I just wanted to have people be very aware that this is going to be, if you take some notes, very easy to understand, because you're going to be using facts. Facts that are it just are incredible.
I had a relative of mine who she had a friend, a lawyer who was a great believer in the election was stolen, and she introduced me to him and said, "We just send him and copy me on your argument why, and I did this, what I'm going to tell you now." And he read it, and she said, "Okay, tell me what about that? What about is it about that that's false?" And he just stared, incomprehending at it for a few minutes, and says, I can't say anything. And he just disappeared. And so I offer this to you, dear listeners and viewers. And I'm only going to cite facts so you can quickly check out indisputable facts. So the first reason that this claim is false, okay, is that elections in the United States are profoundly decentralized, okay? A lot of people imagine that there's some warehouse and some Democratic, and all the votes come in there in sacks and people take them in the back room. No. In the United States, we have almost 180,000 tiny, wholly separate, independent precincts across 50 states. Each one of them is overseen by a tiny group of 3 to 13 precinct workers, and who are Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And observers. And these precinct workers are the only people in the United States who count the votes. And they all sit down elbow to elbow and open the ballots and count it together. And that's the beginning of the end of counting votes in any election in the United States, okay? And they're not supporters, these precinct workers, of either presidential candidate. They're volunteers, or maybe they got paid some of them, but it's their job. They get paid a pittance. And they've been at it in many cases for decades, sitting elbow to elbow with their colleagues under constant video surveillance, opening these cast ballots, envelopes together, counting them. And nationwide, there's only an average about 1,100 votes in each precinct. That's it. So under the Constitution, each state is assigned a certain number of electoral college votes based on their respective number of senators and represent the House. And the 2020 election was decided, as all U.S. elections are decided, by adding up the electoral college votes of each state. And if the candidate has 270 more electoral college votes, that candidate wins, okay? So let's take a quick peek at what it would take to actually change the outcome of the election. If you look at the close battleground states that Trump lost, you can easily calculate the number of change votes it would take in each state to tip the election back to Trump and thus award him the state's electoral college and elect him. Or stated another way, how many change votes it would have taken to wrongfully flip it to Trump I mean, to Biden, assuming that Trump had actually won it, okay? It's just saying it both the same way. In the easiest scenario, the one requiring the lowest number of change votes, that would be flipping only 4 states, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, okay, where Biden won by a combined total of only 78,000 votes. So to flip these states from Trump to Biden or vice versa and change the outcome would require changing only 39,000 votes. And that may sound easy to do, but as I will quickly show you, and even the most superficial examination, it's essentially impossible. First, you'd have to find a way to neutralize all the video cameras and their preserved recorded video that monitored everything 24/7 under police surveillance. Then you'd have to find a way, some way, to alter the written chain of custody of the ballots. And that would require you get your hands on the ballots undetected, since they were kept locked in safes, monitored 24/7 by videos, monitored by law enforcement. Then you'd have to find a way to somehow alter and destroy those cast ballots and substitute new fake ones. That is no small feat. Then the next problem is you're going to have in altering votes is to avoid statistical detection, because the voting composition of each of the 176,000 precincts and the voting history of each precinct is known going back many, many decades, indeed, in many cases, well over 100 years in most. And so you can't just go in and switch a big bunch of votes. That would stick out like a sore thumb. It would be immediately detected. To avoid instant statistical detection, you would need to keep the number of changed votes per precinct small enough to at least be plausible. Otherwise, the change would trigger immediate audits, recounts, and ultimately having the courts throw out the result and order a new election. So to avoid this and keep the proportion of changed votes small enough to pass scrutiny as plausible, you'd have to keep the proportion of changed votes small, and that means you'd have to spread the changes over a very large number of precincts. If you changed even 5% of the votes in a single precinct, that would statistically stick out like a sore thumb, showing an implausible deviation from dozens of prior elections. And that would quickly provoke an investigation, which would likely result in the courts throwing out the outcome, ordering a new election, one with overwhelming security and scrutiny. So
And the obvious thing, if I could interject, if that were to happen, what you just painted, they would have to have such a command system in place, looking at the entirety of those 4 swing states, to sit and say, we've got a problem there, we got a problem there, and all immediately after they had the numbers come in to go and do this in a proper. I mean, it's just logically maddening to even think that that could possibly happen.
It gets worse, Randy.
Gets worse. I can't take worse, but I know you go. I do tell.
So to minimize the chance of detection by algorithms and such, as we just discussed, the number of changed ballots have to be proportionately very small, something like 1%, okay? But just for giggles, okay, let's assume that the Steelers somehow managed to change the actual vote by 5% per precinct, a whopping 5% per precinct, which would make overturning the election a lot easier. But changing only 5% of an average of 1,100 votes per precinct means shifting only 55 votes per candidate to another. And that means to reach this needed switching of 39,000 votes, you need to change that many votes in at least 709 precincts. That's 39,000 divided by 55. Since the precincts are overseen by 8 to 13 regular precinct voters from both parties, including independents, not to mention the observers and the video cameras, that means you have to get all of these election voters, all of them, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and the observers, in at least 709 precincts in on this criminal scheme. Remember that these local precincts are not fierce partisans. They're local citizens who have been doing this for decades because they believe in good government. Thus, the precinct workers are very unlikely to be open to joining a felonious scheme to steal the election, since most of them see themselves as there to prevent exactly that from happening. And they would be unlikely to want to join it for another reason, because it could send them to jail for decades. So assuming only 8 workers per precinct, the actual number is more like 10. If you count, that means that a minimum of 5,670 election workers, 709 precincts times 8 in 4 different states, would have to be in on this massive criminal conspiracy. Remember that we're using only when remember using 5%, but to actually keep the changed votes below the threshold of statistical protection would probably require 1%, thus requiring 5 times the number of co-conspirators, or 28,360 co-conspirators have to be in on it. And recall that we're only assuming 8 precinct workers, and the actual number is closer to 10 or more. And if we take into account the observers, we're looking at up 40,000 people would have to be in on this as co-conspirators. And remember, a third of them are Republicans. We're asking those people to overturn their own guy, and the rest of them are independents who would be against it. And all of them, the poll workers and observers and Democrats, independents, and Republicans alike, would be at risk for going to jail for many, many, many years. And
They all
finally,
have 40,000 people that have to keep a secret.
people say,
That ain't
one thing we know in American history is that nothing of any enduring interest stays secret for anyone. And finally, all of these tens of thousands of every last one of them, as you said, would have to keep it secret for decades, okay, or at least for years. And as you can see, pulling this off on short notice in 4 states among long experienced local workers, many have been doing it for decades because they're committed to free and fair elections and avoiding detection by the video cameras and the independent observers, not to mention finding a way to breach the security around the ballots and somehow alter them, would be so implausible as to be unimaginable. Indeed, as a practical matter, in the real world, one you and I live in, it's impossible. And while we're examining what was originally thought to be the shortest, easiest path to overturn the election, which is flipping the votes in those 4 states, let's look at the bizarre thing that happened in Arizona, which upended that path entirely. Instead, it made overturning the election much, much harder. Most people are unaware of this and what actually happened. In 2020, after Republican leaders in Arizona had already demanded and gotten 3 recounts of the votes, which to their disappointment did not change the outcome, they decided to take matters in their own hands. They hired a group of self-professed experts and computer science people and voting machine technology people to count the voting and vote counting logistics people. The group they hired was called the famed self-styled cyber ninjas. Remember them?
Absolutely.
Both the cyber ninjas and the local Arizona Republicans quickly realized that Biden had won the overall statewide Arizona vote by a razor-thin margin of only about just over 10,000 votes. They also recognized that Biden had won Maricopa County, where Phoenix is, by over 45,000 votes, 4 times the number of votes by which he won the entire state. Thus, all it would take to flip the outcome of the whole state of Arizona and thus award its 11 electoral votes to Trump will be to knock out or change a mere 1% of the 1,040,774 Democratic votes for Biden in Maricopa County. Therefore, to flip the state back to Trump did not require a deep dive discount into the votes of all the state, which would take much longer, vastly more complex logistics. So the Republicans decided to hire the cyber ninjas and task them with solely auditing the votes in Maricopa County. So as the ninjas settled in to do the recount, there was wild jubilation among the Arizona Republicans who believed, and it was widely believed throughout the U.S. Without evidence, that the Democrats had somehow stolen the election. And they confidently assumed, given that the cyber ninjas were the conservative stop-the-steal Republicans, their own hand-picked investigators and vote counters had picked, and because the cyber ninjas were solely in charge of the recount, meant that the Democrats' stealing of the election in Arizona was about to be exposed. There was wild jubilation. The ninjas jumped in eagerly into the task of recounting the votes. Then, suddenly, after about a week, they went silent. And then nothing was heard of them for weeks. Wild speculation abounded throughout the country. Then, after a month of deafening silence, the cyber ninjas suddenly announced, to their everlasting credit, that Trump had actually received less votes than even the official precinct counters had claimed, and that Biden actually won the state by an even higher number of votes in Maricopa County than originally determined. This left the Republicans stunned, utterly speechless for days. Then, when they finally found their voice, they simply refused to accept this 4th vote recount. The meticulously detailed, expertly executed, and copiously documented results of their own hand-picked analysts. They said, no, we're not taking that. Facts and evidence be damned. The Cyber Ninjas' findings, however, had another profound impact, one that's still poorly understood, especially among those who believe the 2020 election was stolen. Given the magnitude of Biden's confirmed 45,000 vote win in the vote-rich Maricopa County meant that Biden, beyond any doubt, had won the entire state of Arizona by a clear margin. And the significance of this is that Arizona's electoral votes undisputedly were in Biden's column. So now, to overturn the election without Arizona's 11 electoral college votes would require overturning the vote in another state or states, okay? The next closest swing state by votes was Michigan, but Biden won Michigan by a much bigger 154,000 votes. What does this mean in terms of the analysis we've been doing and showing what it would take to actually overturn Michigan? Using our assumed 1,100 vote precinct, 8 poll workers, and Michigan's 5.5 million votes cast, it would require switching at least one half of the 54,000 votes cast for Biden, or altering 77,000 votes in Michigan. But given that there are 5,000 precincts in Michigan, this means we need to alter at least 55 votes in each of them, or 28% of them at least. So that means we would require, and with our 8 precinct voters, it would require additional 11,200 additional precinct workers in on this massive felonious scheme. And that assumes that we switch 55 votes. Remember, that's a high estimate, one that's clearly too high to avoid distinction. The real number, it would require shifting about 1%, or 5 times that, or 56,000 precinct workers would need to be in on it. And so in Michigan, we require a minimum of 55,000 more people in this criminal conspiracy. And this would require full cooperation of the Dems, the Indies, and the Republicans. And there too, the same insurmountable problems would exist with ballot access under videos monitored in safes, the difficulty of altering the cast votes, the question of how to alter the voting machine counts, and somehow hiding or altering the actual chain of custody of the cast ballots. It is of great significance and profoundly crucial to note that neither Trump nor any other proponent of the conspiracy theory that the 2020 election was stolen has ever proposed or suggested any remotely plausible way that these seemingly insurmountable tasks or outcomes could have been accomplished. I personally can't think of any conceivable scenario in which this could have been done, and that's probably because there aren't any. So what does this really mean? When you look at the actual numbers and see what was required to steal an election, you can clearly see that the notion that the presidential election vote in 2020 was somehow rigged is false, because it is false, because it is implausible. So implausible as to be unimaginable, indeed, for all practical purposes in the real world where you and I live, Randy, and our viewers live. It is impossible to achieve this. Interestingly, proving my no evidence point, none of the 60 lawsuits filed by Trump supporters that actually went to judicial resolution produced a single shred of evidence of such a conspiracy. All of them, every single one of them, were dismissed out of hand by judges, including many conservative Republicans and even some Trump-appointed judges. The actual evidence that any of these cases seeking to challenge the 2020 election outcome could come up with, only they could come up with, is one case where there was a private poll in that state conducted weeks before the election that showed Trump ahead by 8 points. The problem with this poll was that it was profoundly flawed. It didn't reach out to a proportional group of voters, but instead to a skewered one that favored Republicans. Obviously, if you just ask Republicans who you're going to vote for, you can't get a useful forecast. And you'd have to ask a cross-section, okay? And they didn't. And so it wasn't an accurate forecast. So anyway, the judge said that even if the poll was accurate, and it clearly wasn't, they showed that. Even if it was accurate, there's only one poll that counts. And that's the one, in this case, that is conducted on November 3rd. And we call it an election. And for a variety of reasons, as we all come to appreciate, even well-designed polls are often inaccurate. Why? People lie to pollsters. They change their minds. Sometimes they don't vote. So this reads a different outcome than the one the polls forecast. If all it took to overturn an election was for someone to submit an earlier poll with a different result, no election would ever be final or binding. One judge, a Trump appointee, who dismissed the appeal of one of these cases that got to the Seventh Circuit, wrote in his ruling, to win a lawsuit requires facts and law in your favor. Here, we have neither. Has any of the logic of these undisputed facts had any impact on the stop the steal portion of the electorate? Interestingly, no. Why? The biggest reason, and the theme of this podcast, is because they have abandoned Thales and his insight that the truth is reached through reason and evidence. If reason and evidence support a different conclusion than the one you're advocating, then the conclusion you're supporting is wrong. It's as simple as that. It's another point worth noting here that those pushing conspiracy theories and other false contentions always avoid offering facts and logical arguments that support their contentions. Why? Because when the conspiracy theorists offered facts, the entire debate immediately shifted to the veracity of those offered facts, which are then subjected to intense scrutiny, which they cannot withstand. This is what happened when the 2020 election deniers went to court in 2020. They initially filed like 360 lawsuits to overturn the 2020 election. Courts are not like the public sphere where you can just go in and say nonsense and not be held to account because what you say is going to be neutrally adjudicated. Instead, courts are actually designed to adjudicate disputed facts and test the veracity of disputed facts. Thus, all these 2020 election fraud cases were quickly either voluntarily dismissed by those who filed them after they were shown dispositive, indisputable facts that they just gave up on, or those who ignored the facts and soldiered on without them, their cases were quickly thrown out of the courts for lack of evidence. Then, mindful that they had no facts to support their position, and of what would quickly happen if they tried to defend their position without accurate facts, the election deniers shifted their strategies. It's very important to understand. They immediately begin to ignore calls for evidence and to simply say, we clearly won. It's obvious. And stop there and not say another word. Let it go at that.
Yeah.
Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, told the Trump aides on election night when they're all freaked out and said, well, how are we going to respond to this overwhelming evidence that Biden won? And Rudy said, just say we won. We'll handle the rest. Trump himself later told the Justice Department officials who were investigating election fraud and not finding any to ignore the absence of evidence that the election was corrupt and just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and a Republican congressman, said Trump. The actual facts themselves showed that the 2020 election was the fairest election ever held in the United States. And the vote count was extraordinarily accurate. Not perfect necessarily, but certainly more accurate and accurate enough to remove any doubt or dispute about the actual outcome. Thus, by avoiding discussion of the facts at all, the election deniers avoided having to be mired down in defending the indefensible. This actually proved to be a clever and successful strategy, not in winning the election, but in persuading people to continue to believe the election was stolen in the absence of any evidence. Now, tyrants and dictators have always known this, and they've utilized this for centuries. Hitler used it with Jews, and the dictators in China and Russia today use it to avoid having their lives exposed. Hitler's chief propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, said famously, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. An equally important strategy when pushing lies is to attack and discredit those whose job it is to authenticate the truth. In other words, Trump and the MAGA advocates have long sought to undermine the media, the gatekeepers, the scorekeepers, the courts, law enforcement, even the FBI, which are the ones that dispute lies and hold liars accountable. Trump openly bragged that this was what he was doing. He actually asked in a television interview live by Leslie Stahl on CBS's 60 Minutes in 2018, why he was so intent on attacking the media. And he says, I demean you and discredit you so that the public will not believe you when negative stories come out about me. He actually said it. You can watch him on now on the internet. Trump and his MAGA followers regularly attack the media as fake news in furtherance of that theory. And they regularly attack law enforcement, even the FBI and the Justice Department, and even the fellow Republicans that dare tell the truth. Sadly, this strategy is working. It's working. Again, it's working because of the failure of Trump's followers to follow the wisdom of Thales, requiring evidence before believing political lies or any other wild conspiracy theories. Now, let's take a quick peek at another favorite conspiracy theory, the one about COVID vaccines, where the MAGA people claim are much more dangerous than we are being told. The MAGA people claim in the campaign that the campaign by the CDC urging people to get vaccinated is part of some huge conspiracy. Let's take a quick romp through the evidence here. In 1938, the FDA imposed for the first time all sorts of new clinical proof requirements on the commercial hucksters who were hawking all kinds of dubious medicines and so-called patent remedies. Before 1938, this FDA mandate came in, any charlatan could allege some puffed up nonsense about a drug or other substance and use it to sell some worthless and ineffective medication to gullible and trusting consumers. But after 1938, to market any proposed drug in the United States, the FDA required proponents of that drug to prove the drug actually worked. These requirements have been strengthened many times since, most importantly in the 1990s, when for the first time, double-blind clinical trials were required for all drug approvals. This means that today, the proponent seeking approval to market any drug, including COVID, must separately administer both a placebo and the drug seeking approval to a large number of patients in a clinical setting, with half getting the placebo and the other half being administered the actual drug. If neither the patient or those administering the drug or placebo, neither the patient, or those who administer the drug, neither the patient or those giving them the drug or the placebo knows which is which in these tests. Okay, that's a requirement. Only if the cohort that received the drug experienced a statistically meaningful higher cure or improvement rate than the recipients of the placebo can the drug be approved. In other words, you have to show it works. And adverse reactions are carefully monitored. If they're significant or frequent, the drug is not approved. Against this backdrop, approved vaccines have proved profoundly safe. According to the Centers for Disease Control, an unfathomably vast 13.53 billion doses of the COVID vaccine have been administered worldwide to a staggering 70+% of the entire world's population. Only 1/100th of 1% of the recipients of those vaccines experience any significant side effects. By comparison, over 200 times as many people as that experience allergies and side effects to cow's milk. When the wildest anecdotal claims of the anti-vaxxers are tracked down, they've all proved to be outright false, or the adverse reaction was traced to a different source than the vaccine. Now, to grasp how long vaccines have been safe, it bears noting that way back in the American Revolution, George Washington required his American troops to be vaccinated against smallpox after an outbreak. That ended up giving his troops a significant advantage over his British opponents because they couldn't get access to the vaccine. Vaccines have saved countless lives since the 18th century. According to the World Health Organization, in recent years, vaccines against childhood diseases have literally saved the lives of a mind-blowing 500 million children, mostly in the third world. The bottom line on vaccines is that the logic of taking a vaccine, or to say it another way, its safety, is measured by comparing the risk of the vaccine by the chance of getting the disease it prevents or reduces. In other words, we compare on the one hand the risk of getting or dying from the disease versus the risk of the vaccine. Now, the chance of death from COVID is close to the COVID vaccine is close to zero. As a result, there's overwhelming clinical proof from all over the world that COVID vaccines are extraordinarily safe. Now, the anti-vaxxers, as always, have yet to offer any viable counter evidence or rebuttal that could withstand the most superficial scrutiny. The anti-vaxxers don't address, they just ignore the risk of death or serious illness associated with getting COVID. According to Microsoft and the Brown School of Public Health, roughly 500,000 people in the US who refused to be vaccinated went on to subsequently die of COVID. Think about that. We talked about this early, 500,000 Americans on their hands. According to the CDC, 9 people died after receiving the vaccine as a result of rare blood clots caused by the particular vaccine that Johnson & Johnson's, their version they were using. That was quickly pulled from the market. The problem was corrected, and there were no further deaths. So that's the story of the COVID vaccine conspiracy theory. Okay, finally, there's the mega claims about climate change. This is a very important issue because the future of mankind may depend on our doing a great deal and soon to combat climate change being caused by the burning of fossil fuels. But Trump and the MAGA supporters claim that climate change is a hoax. There are numerous bills in Congress sponsored by MAGA supporters to thwart alternative generation of power and reduce the benefits of electric vehicles, and numerous other efforts are underway to delay or stop progress toward helping reliance on fossil fuels. This week, there were a number of media reports that Trump, during a call with automakers, promised those automakers if they gave his campaign $1 billion, if elected president, he would use his executive powers to eliminate all electric vehicles once and for all. Now, what do we know about climate change? A lot, actually, and it's very, very simple, okay? Scientists have wondered for generations how and why glaciers seem to advance and retreat over periods of time. Evidence of their periodic movements is abundant and has been around for centuries, especially around mountain glaciers, okay? This question was answered decisively by an Irish physicist named John Tyndall. And that mountain behind me is called Mount Tyndall. I've climbed it. It's a 14,000 peak in the Sierra Nevadas. It's named for him. And he published a treatise in 1859 that became the foundation of climate science. And he set up a climate science program at Cambridge. There, in that 1859 paper, he showed that volcanoes spewed out huge volumes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which warmed the earth due to that gas's greenhouse effect, which Tyndall himself had studied and shown how to measure as a physicist. That warming caused glaciers to retreat. Then that carbon dioxide was gradually taken out of the atmosphere by plants and trees and sequestered under the ground in the form of oil, gas, and coal, eventually lowering the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which caused the earth to cool and the glaciers to advance again. It's climate change. It's that simple. It's that simple. Now, an important factor in this discussion that most people don't appreciate is that the Earth's atmosphere is very, very, very thin. Half of it is below 18,000 feet. That's 3 miles. When you go on in a commercial airplane, you go up to 35, 36, 38,000 feet, and you can look out the window and watch the sky darken, darken, darken. As you go up, it's 70 miles, which where the commercial airplanes cruise, you're above 75% of the Earth's atmosphere, and the sky's heading toward being dark. You go up to 60,000, it's black. The entire Earth's atmosphere is the equivalent of a 3-mile long pipe. If you cap both ends of a 3-mile long pipe and tipped it up, you could replicate the Earth's atmosphere, okay? It's paper thin. It's easy to pollute. Look at what happened to the smoke in the forest fires in British Columbia last year. It was on the West Coast. It drifted all the way over North America and polluted the skies over Manhattan, okay? That's how thin and easy it is to pollute the atmosphere. And we know how many barrels of oil and how many tons of coal are being burned each day on Earth, okay? And we know how much carbon dioxide is in each barrel or ton of coal and how much it releases into the atmosphere. And we can use mere simple arithmetic to calculate exactly how much carbon dioxide is being released into the atmosphere every day from burning fossil fuels. And based on Tyndall's demonstrated greenhouse effects of carbon dioxide, which he was able to show precisely through his scientific observations, we can show how much each percentage of increment of increase in carbon dioxide warms the Earth's atmosphere. Thus, again, it takes only a relatively simple exercise in arithmetic with carbon dioxide to see how much it's causing climate change and how much that's increasing the temperature of the Earth. Now, scientists all over the world have refined this to highly precise models, and they can tell. I went to Alaska recently, and I had hired a guide, and he's a local high school teacher, took me down to see the grizzly bears. And on the way down in his boat, he started ranting about this whole thing. And he said, is climate change is a natural phenomenon. These people are all crazy. It's all fake science. And I said, well, I know it's natural because the San Francisco Bay itself is emptied out and filled by like a bathtub 4 times in the last 200,000 years. But I said in the last 100 years, we've dug down in coal and carbon and natural gas, and we've dumped millions and millions of years, maybe tens of millions of years of carbon it was sequestered back into the Earth's atmosphere in the blink of an eye in 100 years. What's natural about that?
Yeah.
And he just looked at me blankly. He had no response. Okay. And we can measure this, and it's known, and the threat is, and the temperature of the Earth is soaring up, and in response to this, they have no rebuttal. And as with all the mega conspiracy theories, the evidence of humans' role in global warming is overwhelming. It's uncontested. There's not a single one of the world's thousands of climate scientists everywhere that contests the assertion that humans burning hydrocarbons like coal is what is causing global warming. Nor do they dispute that if we don't do something about it pretty damn soon, that life as we know it on Earth will no longer be possible. So now it's time to tie this together, Randy. What do all these 4 examples, the Nazis, anti-Semitism, the 2020 election, COVID vaccines, global warming, what do they all have in common? That their respective advocates have no facts in support of them, and all assert positions that are the opposite of the overwhelming, uncontested, scientific, factual truth. They do so in all cases without offering a shred of evidence on their own part in support of their conclusions. What all these examples have in common is that the mega world, like the Hitlers and Nazis before them, are trying to get us to turn our backs on science and on Thales' great insight that truth is reached only through reason and evidence, which is the foundation of the modern world. And the MAGA Nazis want us to ignore that. As Rachel Maddow pointed out, that both the Nazis and the MAGA have recently tried to address that lack of evidence by saying that no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as knowable objective truth. Everything is subjective, they say, which of course is nonsense. They say, don't believe the experts. Don't even believe your own eyes. Believe us instead. Don't ask for evidence. But hard scientific evidence is not subjective. Facts are not subjective. Truth is not subjective. What the MAGA advocates seek in turning our backs on evidence and truth is to take us back to the Dark Ages, back to the time before science, indeed before Thales, to a world that was ruled by superstition and myths and ignorance. This was a time when the average human lifespan was into the 20s. Only if we ignore science, evidence, and reason will we be susceptible to this MAGA propaganda and misinformation and lies, and the horrors that will inevitably come for all of us if we ignore the truth. I hope you found this podcast interesting and informative. Thanks for coming along with me on this, and Randy, and I look forward to having you join me on future podcasts.
Well, Robert, I want to thank you for the last 2 hours that went by in 2 minutes. It is disturbing to watch what's going on in the world today. The observable is easy to observe. I went to Hawaii about 3 years ago, and I wanted to point out to some of my friends my favorite beaches because I had taken my family there and had many great memories. And this is on Maui, and this one beautiful beach I went to show them. We're going to go have lunch and sit on the beach. Unfortunately, there's no beach. It's a foot underwater. And they said, well, this must be tidal. I said, no, there's never any point in time that this would be underwater. And take a look at the horrific hurricanes that have hit the United States, not only in Florida, but in Houston about 2 years ago, where they had 20 inches of rain in 24 hours. I mean, unheard of.
I've seen those beaches in Maui, and I've gone back to glaciers in Washington State and in California that I climbed on with my brother in the 1970s, and those glaciers are gone. And you can see, and all across the world, you can see these glaciers in Europe, shriveling up as climate change comes on, and people continue to ignore it. It's here in California, we're having all kinds of crises with water shortages, droughts, is if the snow stops, we're going to be, we're very vulnerable. And the evidence of it, it's everywhere. The evidence is in the air. You can measure it in the air, and
Right.
the oceans are absorbing enormous amounts of heat. But at some point, it will emit back, and there's going to be these irreversible changes that will be dramatic, and it'll be too late to do anything about it then. So we now have this window, and we're going to do something, and here we have this election coming where it's going to be all about fake news.
It is, and it's about the half the country believes a gentleman, loosely stated, that has been proven by one of the major media newspapers that he lied over 25,000 times in his 4 years in office. 25,000 times, no problem. Let's just distort the truth daily. And if you don't like that, then we'll attract, in his current state of affairs, like you say, you attack the judge, you attack the daughter of the judge, you try to bring down everybody's credibility when he has none. And the thing is to sit down and research. To me, it is phenomenal. It would be easy in this election to sit back and not say anything, particularly when you're in media. But there's a media outlet that for the past 8 years paid nearly $1 billion to somebody for saying some inappropriate things over a period of time. And people still sit and they turn it on and they watch it every day. And they say that, CNN is fake news. But what's strange to me is that if you're on CNN or any of the major networks, you have to apply for those positions. You have to tell the truth. You're some of the people they come on that are talking on the what they call mainstream media are professors. They have jobs other places, and if they came on and just spewed out lies in the same way that the Trump nation believes that they're going to believe what he has to say, they'd lose their job. Brian Williams, who was an anchor newsman years ago for NBC, misstated a very small part of a story about Hillary Clinton and lost his job.
Yeah.
Misreported it just a little bit. And to me, that's significance in that from what they call mainstream news. If you don't like one mainstream news, there's plenty of it out there to listen to. You can go and get different stories and do your own research. But like you say, and you pointed out aptly, is that reason and logic is what people have to wake up, now. I mean, it's so, I just appreciate your time that you've taken to bring together, tie together centuries of how we've gotten here as humankind to get to the point where it is time to take responsibility on our own, to sit and wake up and make the correct judgment in the coming months. And Robert, I really appreciate your time. I know you put a tremendous amount of time in putting that together. It is going to be it's a masterpiece of thought and reason and research, and all of your years that you've dedicated to doing the right thing, whether it was protecting consumers or climbing mountains. And I know all the stories that we've talked to and what you're doing for people now in terms of just giving back to humanity is just tremendous. So I thank you very much for putting all that time together, and I look forward in the future to uncover, as they say, there was 4 ships that Columbus sailed in. The Nina, Pinta, and what was it, Santa Maria, and the St. Thomas. And people forgot about the St. Thomas ship. That's the one that fell off the edge of the earth. I'm sorry, it just went too far. So we'll have to take over moon landings and Sasquatch and the abominable snowman and UFOs, and we've got a lot of things to venture forth and unfold. But this was the important one, and I truly appreciate the time you put into it today.
Thank you, Randy. I look forward to the next one with you. It'll be fun.
Well, safe travels. And again, for everybody, I want to thank you for listening. And I know you all took notes. All you're going to have a lot of questions, but this is old Uncle Randy. And for now, this week, we hope you tune in next week. And you always can go to our Facebook page of Excited Minds Media, and always follow us on excitedmindsmediatv.com. where all of our great interviews and shows and insights are going to be unfolding in the coming days and weeks. So anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Mary, you might tell your listeners, your viewers, that if they have any questions about this, or things they want to, follow up on, if they email you them, that we can at some point in the future we can take those and discuss them.
Yeah, we can. And in the footer, that's where we have all of our emails that you can email to info@excitedmindsmedia.com, and we will get back to those answers in the future. So anyway, we thank you, Robert, and we'll look forward to having everybody tune in within the next couple of weeks. I'll be letting everybody know when Robert's back on. I know he's going to go venture across the world for a couple of weeks and see what's going on across the pond. I'll be here in the Soul Uncle Randy for Excited Minds Media. Tune in next week, and thank y'all. Be safe out there. Bye-bye.